of the health track was to look at how we could optimally use open data towards enhancing and improving quality and affordable healthcare in Africa. So our question was, how do you use open data to that effect? And we had really laid back, crowdsourced, all that good stuff that we deal with and are familiar with. And we came up with the answer that we need to be addressed to get there. And that statement was turning access into insight that lead to effective actions. Turning access into insight that lead to effective actions. And so in the process, we tried to address, well, we broke down and discussed what really we mean by the key terms in that approach. Access, insight, and effective actions.
And can you give us some concrete examples, maybe? What do you mean by access and the insight? What were some of the concrete things that you discussed?
That was the interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of it all, we decided to let people tell us, let us tell ourselves what really we mean by these terms, and then try to aggregate them as to what are the common running themes. And so access ended up becoming not so much as issue of the act itself, but as perhaps the impediment to those actions. And I mean, there's a slew of them, and we definitely hope to share some more of them in the virtual night.
The only reason I'm asking is that I see that in every group there was a lot of lessons learned. So what you're hearing from your group, what were the lessons learned? Can you give us maybe some of the examples that you heard whereby, as you talked about the impediments, what were they?
Well, some of the lessons learned in terms of definitely is really for us to look at what are some of the key things that we really think we need to make sure we understand, that we're all on the same page when not we, meaning sponsors, implementers, stakeholders, targeted beneficiaries, all that sort of things, that we make sure we know that we're all talking about the same thing. Okay, I mean, I would identify that as one of the key issues learned.
Sure.
In the process.
Sure. Yeah. I just usually like to give room. Is there anybody from the group, I'll allow maybe one or two people maximum from this group, who feel that there's definitely something very important that they would like to raise, and they feel that, you know, it's so important that if I don't mention this as part of the lessons learned, then, you know, I will go home with a heavy heart. Okay?
Is that okay?
Yes.
So we talked a lot about timeliness and how that was a key element in access, actions, and insights, and how significant it was, especially in the context of the Ebola crisis and in battling outbreaks of malaria. And then we also looked at the people aspect, especially in regards to health, where it's unique, or not unique, but it's unusual. In health, we actually have access to all of our, or to a significant amount of resources right there in regards to patients. So we talked about how to get data to patients, how to get data to doctors, how to respond to stakeholders, how important were those stakeholders, and how relevant were they in contributing to our effective actions. So we talked a lot about that and how to qualify the term effective action.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're up with the 5 minutes, so then I just wanted to move on. Aiden, for your part in your group for education, you've got 5 minutes. If you keep it less, it's great because we can have more interactivity. What was the takeaway from your session? Feel free. I know that, you know, sometimes you feel like I need to say and talk about everything, but if you can just sort of keep it brief, that would be really great.
Okay. I asked that question at the very end, so it's still a little fresh in my mind. Each of our panelists had one takeaway, but I'll pick a number. Number one, sharing data is a way of validating it. We had a bit of a discussion about what is valid data. We had a bit of a conversation about data, information, opinion, how do you distinguish between these three things, and messaging, because sometimes governments or civil society organizations like Twaweza can overstretch a message. So it's important to distinguish between data, fact, opinion, and this kind of thing. But sharing the data, making it open, is actually a way of validating it, because if it's wrong, somebody will say, this is wrong, go back and do it. Next thing, there was a question, what do we want to achieve with open data in the education track? Are you hitting government that they're not doing their job, or are you providing parents or education managers with choices, with evidence to make changes if something is not working? An interesting one is that, look, education is a very complex thing. Education, in fact, learning outcomes is a wicked problem. It's a complex thing. Many things go into it, and just focusing on education data or sector data that emerges out of just the education sector could be missing a lot of information into what goes into learning. For example, malnutrition data, other data from other sectors can help us understand better what it is that drives the education outcomes. Tools. If you're going to make data open, and if you're going to appeal to the retail segment of the data consumers, parents, students themselves, the tools have to be compelling and appealing to the public. Don't expect them to come and understand how to do tables or operations that will make the data make sense. But I think one of the opening presentation was very compelling from FHI. And I think he showed us a couple of examples. One that probably sticks to mind is that don't expect the decision makers to access the system, where the data is stored and how it's presented, but you can send the system itself to the decision maker and have them use it in a more user-friendly way. So talk to FHI, where is Mr. Sergio? He may not be in this room, about that. I think it's a very useful dashboard to use from FHI. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful, thank you. How much time do we have? 2 minutes? Before I forget, I'm guilty as charged. Chris Roker from the Extractive Industries Group. I would like to ask the ushers to find Chris. So, wonderful. Anybody from the group, from the education group? Yes, go on.
Thank you. I think our moderator perhaps could have brought this out more sharply. There was the issue of focus in education, as to whether it is for access or education outcome, and the orientation of the data to either touch on both areas with a relatively balanced focus, so that Tanzania was given as an example where, because of introduction of universal primary education, education outcome, or if you would like to call it the quality of the output or outcome, had dropped. And I think we asked the question, we voted on it. So those who prefer emphasis on access and those who prefer emphasis on education outcome. That was about even.
Yeah, it's true.
Personally, I would say that access is very important. Because if you don't have access, then whose daughter or son are you going to leave out of the count?
Thank you very much. I have 1 minute to take if there's any extra comment or if there's a very important question from anyone. Anyone? Otherwise, we're saving time. Great. I see Anna and Ben, you're here as well. So you've got 5 minutes, but it would be really great if you can keep it under that so we can take comments and questions. So please go ahead with your group that was dealing with agriculture.
So first, we apologize for being late, but here we are.
It's okay.
Okay, so we had 4 major groups at our session. It was really interactive and fun. We had representatives from farmers' organizations, we had government officials, and we had researchers, and we had NGOs. We really had discussions on the fact that we do have a lot of data that is used by farmers already, but we really want to know how these can be used much better within Africa, but in other regions as well. These key data sets are weather data, price market data, and agriculture inputs. We also talked about how these data sets need to be available for farmers to make the right decisions and investments. Because really it's not easy to reach a consensus amongst the multi-stakeholders. You just heard about all the different actors that were at our panel session and speaker session. We also know that the health sector needs to be merged with nutrition beyond an agricultural focus that has nutrition within it. And the importance of nutritional data is really related to general health issues that are generated from local knowledge and cultural aspects as well. So we need to consider these in our data to make changes. We also learned that agricultural research institutions have massive amount of data sets out there that are currently not used. So they have potentially great impact, but they're just sitting there. So how do we move that forward to get people to use this data? And of course, we have the importance of the private and public sector collaboration. And we can't forget that we do need to have responsible data use within each actor involved. And of course, responsible data use is a complex discussion, and that needs to continue. But even before we talk about responsible data use, we need to have an open data 101 and a farming 101. So people understand from one page what each of these two different fields are, and a nutrition 101. And then come together and talk about these issues, because the farmers don't necessarily know what open data is, so we need to have a clear message on that.
Wonderful. How much time do we have? Give or take? 3 minutes. Wonderful. Is there anybody from the group who feels there's something, an important point that needs to be made? Please.
Thank you. My name is Onegitu. Actually, I'm looking at the perspective of developing the agricultural sector economically rather than socially, because this is a mismatch. If people can make more money, definitely they will go for it. But if it's treated like a social concept of, so then we cannot bring up business people. If agric is treated like a business, you have all the stakeholders contributing and everybody's making money on the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I wanted to quickly ask, does it mean that in that group did you discuss whether being socially important or economically important, is it necessarily exclusive, mutually exclusive, or is it something that's possible?
No, it's certainly not exclusive. They go together, but I want to emphasize that it's all about getting the GODA network is about making the connections between the partners to discuss these issues around the economic importance of open data and the cultural aspects of how to go beyond the problems you have with those cultural aspects.
Sure. So then there is that angle. Go on, Anna. You wanted to make a point. Go on. We still have time.
So this will be the interesting perspective to have this public and private sector partnership where you have all of these actors together on the table to talk about using the same data sets and building a consensus of a use for them, a community, so a community ownership perhaps of this, and how will that move forward, because that resonates with the economic side and the social side.
That's a great point. Thank you very much. Mitch, tell us your takeaway from your group. It's dealing with local data.
Right. So I'd like to start with the end, if I may. We had a series of small group discussions at the end of the session for about the last hour that generated quite a large body of work that we're busy compiling at the moment and we'll be publishing later. And some of that will be taken to the Global Community Day that's happening in Washington, D.C. in 2 weeks. In partnership with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So there is some feedback going directly from here to there, an African perspective. in terms of subnational, what we really wanted to get to was, after all the talk of open government partnerships and national level policies, what really needs to happen is that the data has to make it to the ground. People who are out in the villages and towns, and how do they make use of it? Bitanga Ndemo started us off and made it very clear that one of the main issues is timeliness in data. We need real-time data to get pushed down into the communities so that we can take action now as opposed to on data that was 4 years old. The other main point that he made is that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are not just a concept, and they now need to be translated to a local level. And I think his concern is that the SDGs could be orphaned if we fail to capture them and really take them down to a local level where they can do some good and be used. So I think that was a warning that was well done. We had case studies from Kenya and from the Edo State in Nigeria, with some interesting examples on community policing, and how to develop a dialogue between local governors and citizens by making sure that each of them have access to information and they can start to query each other. The example was that if you give some information to citizens and they ask the local governors may be confused the first time, the second time they're prepared. So they really come ready to go. The last thing, 2 more points. It was pointed out that packaging of information at the local level is absolutely critical. If you can't make the ideas known and understood by people in the villages, then they probably won't do much good. And the last point, Davis Adieno had a great point. I'll quote, "To make people count, we must count people." And the real key there is that we have to do simple things. We have to do birth and death registrations. We have to do simple administrative functions that really drive the work for the people on the ground.
Wonderful, thank you, Mitch. How much time do we have? 2 minutes? Okay, very quickly, I'm just going to pose a quick question. When you talk about counting people, there's so much data that exists out there that is not necessarily coming from the Statistics Bureau. But I'll give you an example. Banks have data and all that. Was there a discussion around how to try to solidify that?
There was. I think it's acknowledged that it's a hard problem to engage the private sector in open data and make it useful. It's certainly something that did come up and was discussed, but I'm hoping that some of the feedback that we'll get from the last sessions will tie into that.
Wonderful. So anybody from the group who has something that, he or she feels is very important or a question, I think this was really useful as well. This was a great group as well. Of course, they're just giving us the highlights. If not, let me move on, because I see that, this is getting really interesting more and more. I would like to welcome now Brigadier General Msuya, just to give us a bit of a feedback on the citizen urban data.
Thank you very much, moderator. Our group was a good combination of representatives from different countries all Africa. And we were to discuss about the city and urban in relation to the open data. Now, by saying city and urban, the one that will lead you to say this is city and this is urban, we find that is the data. It is the combination of different data that will lead you to say this is an urban and this is the city. You can name some of the data that will lead you to say now this is a city. Demography, economy, social activities, something like that. And then we discussed it and tried to look at if this one is made from a combination of data, then who really need data? People from rural or people from urban? We came to find that all of them need data. And then they need data for what purpose? We came that they need data for making a decision process. They need data. Depending on regardless of what they are doing. And then this data also they need when they allocate their resources at urban area, also at rural area. And then we came to find that when they plan, you sit for planning, you need to have data at your hand. And then sometimes you need to have mobilization. To mobilize the resources that you have, you need to have data. And then the advocacy for critical gaps that needs. So you need to have data also for that purpose. And then when you plan, you'll have to prepare yourself. Before you start preparation, then and during preparation, then you'll have to use different data for that activities. And then, for example, me from the disaster management, when you respond for disaster, you need to have real data for that work. And again, after discussing all this, we tried to go into reality. Our group tried to look at the flood resilience. So we discussed and we played with the resources that we had, with the knowledge from each individual and each group, the accessibility of the data. We played with that game, and then we also look at the luck. You can have all this, but you don't have a luck. So the luck has a chance. But we do advise not to depend on luck. Use the data that you have so that you can deal with the situation during the preparation period. So generally, we came to the solution that rural people and urban people all need a good combination of data that will make real change in the area for Africa as a whole. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brigadier General Msuya. We actually have very little time left, but if there's anything very important anyone from the group feels, or if there's a very important question, as we know, of course, when we talk about cities and urban areas, we're talking about a huge amount of population. So as the Brigadier General said, planning is key because you need to handle millions of people at the same time. And as he comes from the Directorate of Disaster Management Office, it means that I'm sure he has a lot of concerns when it comes to mobilizing resources, as he said. If there's no important question or addition to that, let me move on and give room to you, Chris, for the extractive industries.
Let me first apologize for being late. I didn't see this on the program at all. Thanks for warning me. So we had a pretty fiery session, and the kind of top takeaways, there were a couple, but I think for me the top ones were that one of the issues with extractive industry data is that it's massive, it's kind of boring. The big problem is understanding the audience for the data or for the products of the interrogation of that data and getting the message out there. So many of the people in the room were talking about how much work is invested into producing a piece of data journalism or data analysis and how difficult it is getting in front of the right people. And there were some solutions to that, mainly, none of them involved dumbing it down. Mainly solutions were around trying to focus on what the core of stories are, the core meaning is for a piece of data that you want to surface, and sacrificing the complexity of the story just so you can get the kind of top issues out. The other points were that the existing data sometimes isn't enough from extractive industries, not sometimes, almost always isn't enough. That the interrogation of that data is as important as the surfacing of that data. So, for example, trying to track shell companies for the oil industry through the kind of and ownerships of oil tankers through the myriad kind of connections is a very difficult task. And so we need people who are practiced and capable of interrogating that data and working with it. Another point was that we focus a bit too much on the government side of data and should be spending more time on looking at the corporations' themselves. So not just the interaction between industry and government, but the kind of framework around that as well, the other companies involved in them. And also, another good point was that we tend to focus too much on the financial implications of the data we're looking at in terms of the extractive industries, and there should be more of a focus on things like environment and the human cost of what's happening, and surface that from the data. Then another one was that there's a massive challenge within governments in terms of resources to make this data available. Sometimes the challenges seem to be self-imposed, so as in like supplying you with a multiply photocopied PDF, but other times it's a genuine resource challenge for governments, and there should be some way for us to produce tools that enable that process. The second last comment was that people have a tendency to put out data sets or to produce stories around data from the extractive industries and then leave it at that. And then in fact the meaning of data grows exponentially with the reuse and reuse of that data. So we should be not always moving on to the next thing, but actually engaging multiple times in multiple avenues with data sets. And then the last one is that you need to measure results. It's no good just putting out stories, putting out data, putting up data portals, buying shares in Document Cloud. We need to measure what's happening and what's happening to the data. The only way we can possibly understand who's consuming the data and how to change the structure of that data is by understanding what happens with end users. So much more emphasis on measuring results.
Thank you very much. We've got 1 minute, and I would like to ask if there is anyone from the group who feels that there's a very important point left out. If not, I think because of the fact that we're running a little late in the schedule, I would like to now thank very much our representatives from the different sessions of Open Data at Work. Can we get a round of applause for them, please? That was a great presentation.